Clara's scalp gleamed like polished bone in the morning light, every stubble catching the sun like scattered thorns. She sat on the porch steps of what used to be her home, her trembling fingers tracing the brutal geography of her shorn head. The hair lay scattered in the dirt yard behind her, auburn strands that had once cascaded to her waist, now trampled into the dust by her late husband's family. Whore Martha Caldwell had hissed as she'd worked the razor. "You think we didn't know about you and that Mexican? You think we're fools?" But Clara hadn't been with Miguel Ramirez. She'd only spoken to him twice, once to buy grain, once to ask directions. The truth didn't matter to the Caldwells. Thomas had been dead 3 months, and they wanted her gone from the land that had been his, that should have been theirs. The hair was just the beginning. They'd stripped her of dignity first. Property would follow. Now she sat waiting for nothing, wrapped in a threadbare shawl that couldn't hide the shame written across her naked scalp. The Caldwell brothers had ridden off at dawn, satisfied with their work, promising to return with papers to claim the homestead. Martha had spat at her feet before climbing into the wagon. "Be gone by sundown, or we'll do worse than shave you." The morning stretched endless and hollow. No neighbors would help. The Caldwells owned half the territory, employed the other half. Clara had nowhere to go, no family to take her in. She'd married Thomas straight from the orphanage in Kansas City, followed him to this god-forsaken stretch of Nevada territory, where the wind never stopped howling, and the alkali dust turned everything white as bone. That's when she heard the hoofbeats. A lone rider approached from the eastern hills, his horse picking careful steps through the sage. Clara pulled the shawl tighter, but there was no hiding what they'd done to her. The man dismounted at her gate, tall, weathered, with silver threading his dark hair. She'd seen him in town but never spoken to him. Jacob Holloway, owner of the Triple H Ranch, one of the few men in the territory who didn't bow to Caldwell money. He studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes taking in the devastation of her appearance. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd never had to raise it to be heard. "You're coming with me." Clara's hands flew to her head, pulling the shawl forward. "I can't look at me. I am looking." Jacob's voice held no pity, which somehow made it easier to bear. "And I see a woman who's been wronged. Nothing more, nothing less." She wanted to refuse. Taking charity from a stranger felt like another kind of shame, piled on top of what the Caldwells had already heaped upon her. But pride was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with night coming and winter only weeks away. "Why?" The words scraped raw from her throat. Jacob adjusted his hat brim against the climbing sun. "Because what they did was wrong. Because I've got space. Because," he paused, something flickering across his weathered features, "because my Sarah would have wanted me to." The past tense didn't escape Clara's notice. She'd heard whispers in town about Jacob Holloway's wife, dead these 5 years from fever. Some said it had broken him, others claimed it had made him harder. Looking at him now, Clara thought maybe it had made him lonelier. "The Caldwells won't like it," she warned. "They'll say you're harboring their property. You're not property." His tone could have cut steel. "And I'm not afraid of the Caldwells." But Clara was afraid. Afraid of what it meant to accept help. Afraid of what people would say. Afraid of the debt she'd owe this strange, stern man who looked at her shorn head without flinching. Most of all, she was afraid of hope. The treacherous thing that whispered maybe she didn't have to face this alone. "I have nothing to give you in return." Didn't ask for anything. Behind them dust clouds rose on the horizon, riders coming fast. Clara's blood turned to ice water. The Caldwells returning sooner than promised. Jacob followed her gaze, his hand dropping instinctively to the Colt at his hip. "Decide now," he said quietly. "Stay and face whatever they've got planned, or ride with me." Clara looked at her little homestead, the cabin Thomas had built with his own hands, the garden she'd tended, the life she'd tried to build. Then she looked at the approaching riders, counting at least 6 men. The Caldwell brothers, their hired guns, maybe Sheriff Morrison who'd been in their pocket since the day he pinned on the badge. She stood on unsteady legs, the shawl slipping to reveal the full extent of their cruelty. "I'll come." Jacob helped her onto his horse just as the riders crested the hill. Clara pressed against his back, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart beneath his vest. The shawl whipped behind them as they rode, but she no longer cared who saw her shame. Behind them shouts erupted. Luke Caldwell's voice carried on the wind. "Holloway, you bring her back here." But Jacob only spurred his horse faster, taking them through arroyos and over ridges with the confidence of a man who knew every stone and shadow of this land. The Triple H ranch spread across a valley, sheltered by red rocks, the house built solid and square against the elements. Jacob helped Clara down in the yard, where a Mexican woman emerged from the kitchen. "Esperanza," Jacob said simply. "This is Clara. She'll be staying." The older woman took one look at Clara's shorn head and nodded grimly. "See, patron, I prepare a room." But even as Esperanza led Clara inside, they could hear it, the thunder of hoofbeats growing closer. Through the kitchen window, Clara watched the dust cloud approach, her stomach clenched with familiar terror. "They're coming," she whispered. Jacob checked his rifle, his movements calm and methodical. "Let them come. You don't understand. They'll burn you out. They've done it before to anyone who crossed them. Then they'll learn something new today." 6 riders surrounded the house, their horses stamping and snorting. Luke Caldwell dismounted, his face flushed with anger. His brothers flanked him, Nathan with his cruel smile, Samuel fingering his gun belt. Sheriff Morrison sat his horse like a man who wished he were anywhere else. "Holloway," Luke's voice cracked like a whip, "send out our property." Jacob stepped onto the porch, rifle loose in his hands. "Don't see any property here, just a woman under my protection. That whore belongs to us. She was married to our brother. Your brother's dead. Marriage ended with him." Nathan Caldwell spat into the dirt. "She dishonored his memory, running around with that greaser flaunting herself." "That's a lie." Clara called from the doorway, her voice stronger than she felt. Luke's eyes blazed. "You calling us liars, whore?" Jacob's rifle came up an inch. "Call her that again." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Sheriff Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, hand hovering near his badge, as if remembering what it was supposed to mean. "Last chance, Holloway," Luke growled. "Send her out, or we'll take her, over my dead body." Nathan laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That can be arranged." Time crystallized into heartbeats. Clara watched from the doorway, her hand pressed to her throat, feeling the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. 6 guns against 1, no matter how skilled Jacob might be. She'd brought death to his door. Then Esperanza appeared beside her, carrying a shotgun like she'd been born to it. "Esperanza." "No," Clara whispered. "See," the older woman replied firmly. "This is home. We protect home." From the barn came another sound, boots on boards. A young man emerged, rifle in hand, then another from behind the house. Ranch hands, Clara realized. Men who worked for Jacob Holloway, men who'd stay and fight. Sheriff Morrison cleared his throat. "Now Luke, maybe we should." "Shut up, Morrison." But Luke's certainty had cracked. 6 against 1 was odds he liked. 6 against 6 with Jacob Holloway's reputation factored in, was something else entirely. "I'll go with them," Clara said suddenly. "This isn't your fight." Jacob didn't turn around. "Yes it is." "Why?" The word tore from her chest. "Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" Now he did turn, his gray eyes holding hers. "Because the day we stop protecting those who can't protect themselves is the day we stop being human." He paused, something soft creeping into his voice. "And because Sarah always said the measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching, it's what he does when no one would blame him for walking away." Clara felt something break open in her chest, not the brittle crack of heartbreak, but the warm flood of belonging. This strange, stern man who'd offered sanctuary without questions, who spoke of his dead wife like she still guided his choices, who'd rather die than surrender someone under his protection. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then turned back to face the Caldwells. "You've got your answer. Ride away, or we settle this now." Luke Caldwell's face contorted with rage and something else, the dawning realization that his power had limits. that there were still men in this territory who wouldn't bend the knee to Caldwell money and threats. "This isn't over, Holloway." "Yes," Jacob replied quietly, "it is." Sheriff Morrison was the first to break. He reined his horse around, tipping his hat to Jacob. "Miss Clara, Mr. Holloway, I'll be heading back to town now." The spell shattered. Luke Caldwell cursed, but the moment had passed. Without the sheriff's badge to hide behind, they were just 6 men threatening a fortified ranch. Even Caldwell pride had its limits. "You'll regret this," Luke snarled, but he was already backing toward his horse. "Doubt it," Jacob replied. They rode away in a cloud of dust and wounded pride, leaving only the whisper of wind through sage and the distant cry of a hawk. Clara sank onto the porch steps, the weight of terror and relief making her legs unsteady. "It's over?" she asked. "It's over." Jacob sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "They won't be back. Luke's not fool enough to start a range war he can't win. And my homestead, I'll buy it from them, fair price, keep them from burning it out of spite." Clara turned to study his profile, the weathered lines around his eyes, the silver threading his temples, the quiet strength that had saved her when she'd had nowhere else to turn. "Why are you doing all this?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun sink toward the red rocks on the horizon. "Sarah and we never had children, always meant to, but," he shrugged, "when she was dying she made me promise something, said there'd come a day when someone would need what we couldn't give each other. Made me swear I wouldn't let loneliness make me selfish. Is that what this is? Keeping a promise to your wife?" He looked at her then, really looked, his eyes taking in her shorn head, her worn dress, the strength that had carried her through shame and terror. "Started that way," he admitted, "but maybe it's something else now." Clara felt heat bloom in her cheeks, not the burning flush of humiliation, but something warmer, more fragile. "Jacob, I no need to say anything, just stay, work the ranch if you want, rest if you need to, figure out what comes next when you're ready." She nodded, afraid to trust her voice. Around them the ranch settled into evening quiet, Esperanza humming in the kitchen, horses nickering in the corral, the soft lowing of cattle in distant pastures. It felt like home in a way her little homestead never had. That night, Clara stood before the mirror in the guest room. Esperanza had prepared. Her reflection still shocked her, the stubbled scalp, the 2 large eyes in her thin face. But something had changed. The shame was still there, probably always would be, but it no longer defined her. She'd found something worth more than hair, more than pride. She'd found a place where she belonged. Years later, when her hair had grown long again and silver threaded through the auburn, Clara would tell her children about the day Jacob Holloway had saved her. Not from the Caldwells, she'd saved herself from them by choosing to leave. He'd saved her from something worse, the belief that she was alone in the world, but that was still to come. Tonight, she simply touched her fingertips to the glass and whispered, "Thank you, Sarah," to a woman she'd never met but would spend the rest of her life trying to honor. Outside her window, the Nevada stars burned bright and eternal over the Triple H ranch, where a broken woman had learned that sometimes sanctuary comes not from running away, but from finally finding the courage to run towards something worth having.